Thank you, JNF, for having me. It's a pleasure. Okay, so I have a little bit of time. So I thought of actually not talking about what I normally talk about, which is how to fight anti-Semitism. I think that especially after October the 7th, we have heard so much of that. And I think that we all also know to recognize when people hate us and when people attack us. I mean, I speak to you from Israel, but all of you have been direct victims of violence on campuses. You send your kids to schools. I guess everyone is now asking what to do ahead of the new school year. I actually wanted to talk a little bit about myself, where I come from, and what Zionism and Judaism mean to me today, and how that intersects with what I do and what I chose as my profession. Contrary to what my name would tell you, which is that either I am from the former Soviet Union or that I am from Germany, hence Deutsch, I'm actually from a tiny Jewish community in a European country, Serbia, that is former Yugoslavia to you. So this war in Israel is definitely not the first one that I experienced. The first one hit the Balkans, Serbia, when I was 13, and then the next one when I was 19. So some will have you believe that I actually go from country to country that is torn by wars. I was actually evacuated twice from Serbia by Jewish organizations and Israeli national institutions, many of them actually supported generously by people such as yourself. And back then I used to ask myself, how come there are Jews around the world who don't even know who I am, but they actually mobilize resources, financial, but not only, and then, send entire programs and projects to bring me to Israel to safety when my country is torn by wars. It took me a while to fully come circle and understand what a global Jewish community actually means. But for me, I guess the first time I understood Zionism and my connection to Israel when I was 11. I was in the 5th grade of elementary school, and my family name before I married, and the joke is on me, was Israel. So I was Olga Israel. When I lived in Germany, I was Olga Israel. Now that I live in Israel, I'm Olga Deutsch. And we had a geography class. And our teacher used to do a roll call by alphabet, right, to make sure that we are all in attendance. So he called up the name of the girl before me. And then when my turn came, instead of calling my name, Olga Israel, he called Olga Palestine. I was 11. I had no idea what Israeli-Palestinian conflict meant or any details about it, nor, needless to say, did I have an opinion about it. I didn't answer for a few times, and he kept saying, Olga Palestine, Olga Palestine. And finally, he got upset and he said, Olga Israel. I said, I'm there. But that was the first time I went back home and asked my parents, what's it all about? What is really the meaning of my family name, and why did it trigger such a reaction in my geography teacher in elementary school? And that was the first time that I understood the connection between every Jew around the world, regardless of his or her politics, and the state of Israel. Many, many years later, as a Jewish student leader, I got elected as the chairwoman of the European Union of Jewish Students, first such person coming from the Eastern Europe, which was an umbrella organization giving a political voice to European Jewish students, 180,000 of us back then. Many, many years later, I chose to join NGO Monitor, which actually proactively fights anti-Semitism. But to me, it is much more meaningful than just combating Israel delegitimization or anti-Zionism or anti-Semitism. And yes, delegitimizing Israel's right to exist is the ultimate expression of anti-Semitism today, but it's not the only one. To me, it is fighting for our right to have a state, to be here, fighting for the right to choose Israel as a home and raise my children here. And although I deal with proof of how many and how institutionally they hate us on daily basis, right, as my profession, I actually learned through my professional career that most of the people out there are either ignorant, so they don't necessarily have an opinion on Jews or on Israel, and many are actually our friends or allies. They just don't have enough information. So I choose to, even when I combat anti-Semitism, engage with our counterparts in Europe or in the US. And there, I have many stories where 9 years ago, when I first joined NGO Monitor, my first business trip was actually to Germany. And I met with a very progressive member of the German parliament. And he said to me, I will meet with you under one condition, that you don't post anywhere and you don't share. And when I entered his office, he started screaming at me. Fast forward, just 3 weeks ago, I came back from Berlin, where him and me together presented a policy paper on how Germany should make sure that its humanitarian aid to Palestinians after the war is not diverted to terror. And how did that happen? Because I engaged. I actually let him speak. I let him ask the questions, even the really tough ones. Through my answers, I showed to him that we are in many ways much more similar than there are things that set us apart. Not every conversation would end up like that one, but most will, because most people are curious, at least, to engage with us. Now, it's more of a philosophical approach even to Zionism. You know, it is so easy to be swept away by the amount of hate, especially after October the 7th. It is almost like a whirlpool. But the more we engage and the more we show who we really are as Zionists and as Jews, the more we show that actually one of our main traits as a community, as a global community, is our collective resilience. And part of that resilience is drawing motivation and strength, even from the worst of tragedies, such as October the 7th, that has befallen us. Now, it is not only a tragedy that befallen us here in Israel. I was mortified, like everyone, to see the horrible anti-Semitism that was unleashed after October the 7th around the world. And probably most shocking for everyone was what happened in North America, because many will, say that anti-Semitism has always been there in Europe and in the former Soviet Union. So it was not really a surprise that it was unleashed after October the 7th. But what happened to the Northern America Jewish community was really mind-blowing. And yet, I believe that what happened after October the 7th poses also a historical opportunity and lays a historic responsibility on all of our shoulders to use that as an opportunity to recalibrate and redefine what Zionism is. It should be a value that connects all of us. It should be a value that allows us to grow, to redefine and continue doing so our relationship with Israel. That is something that should be able to bring all of us together, left-wing, right-wing, progressive, religious, atheist, Jews, all Jews of all shapes and forms. And we have allowed too many external factors to divide us before October the 7th. But I want to make an appeal here with you tonight, or to this morning, depending where you're tuning in from, to actually use the hate that is being thrown in our direction to reunite around something positive. And I know that we're short on time, so I'll just finish with an even more personal part of that appeal to me. As a woman Jewish leader in the 21st century, that is even more a responsibility that I carry on my shoulders. When I first joined the pro-Israel community, even as a student Jewish activist, I would normally be either the only woman or one of the very few. And even the organized Jewish world and communal world was mainly reserved for the men amongst us. And women were we were expected to fulfill more traditional roles. But I feel that after October the 7th, we have an even more of a responsibility to show the different type of Jewish leadership, a more driven by more soft skills, again, engaging, allowing for the conversation, even when the conversation is difficult. And I say this as someone who engages in difficult conversations on daily basis. So instead of talking about anti-Semitism, I wanted to talk about my personal journey, because that is what has painted, that is what has defined what I eventually chose as a profession. And I want to believe that I have given you maybe a little bit of motivation. I am raising two boys in Israel. They're now 11 and 7, but in no time they will also come to an age to enlist in the IDF. And trust me, even now, I am mortified of what might become of that, because we all know that this is probably not the last war. But I raised them exactly with that sense of responsibility. We all have something to give. And going back to that original story of my geography teacher, when I asked myself, how come there are so many Jewish leaders around the world who are willing to give, some by writing a check, some by leading Jewish organizations, and some by organizing programs like that one that brought me to Israel twice as I was a kid, rescuing me from the war. I learned throughout the life that as Jewish leaders, we fulfill different roles in different times of our lives. So there was a time when I was on the receiving end, and now I am able to give back, not by writing a check necessarily, but by running one of the organizations that is trying to fight anti-Semitism. And we focus in those spaces where it hurts us the most. We try to debunk anti-Semitism in what we call today human rights space. And we have all seen how all of us, not only Israelis, but the global Jewish community, was failed after the October 7th by the UN Women Organization and many, many other human rights organizations. So I take that cyclical nature of our collective global Jewish community resilience, and I draw inspiration and motivation from it. And I hope that I was able to share some part of that with you today. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak to you today. And I'm obviously happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Olga, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your inspiring story and being an example of how leaders can lead in the fight against anti-Semitism. One quick question for you before we move on, because we are short on time, of course. If you had to suggest 1, 2, or 3 short, succinct strategies for those of us on a daily basis when we may be facing or we see out there, what would you suggest to us?
Well, that is not a short question, Joe, but let me try. There are multiple levels on which we need to operate, and I think we are in such an existential crisis moment for the Jewish people that we cannot select only one of them. We have to operate on all. I would start with the top-down approach. I do think that all of us now need to engage with our policy makers, with our elected officials, in your case, congressional offices and your local leaders. Because at the end of the day, we are seeing the global discourse that is being very divisive and very, very hateful, and yes, very anti-Semitic or Jewish dismissive. But the ones that we have to resort to to dictate what is allowed in the public space are our elected officials. So I believe that on that level, we have to be much more vocal and demand or even educate what is offensive to us. No one else gets to define what feels anti-Semitic to us other than us. So many are trying, but that is not okay. Imagine a situation in which a Jewish organization would walk into Congress and start defining Islamophobia on behalf of the Muslim community. That is unheard of. And we also need to call for all those trying to do that for us to be sanctioned, right? Now, on the organizational Jewish level, I really think that internally, right, we need to work on sticking much more together and spending much more time on what unites us rather on what divides us. Because there is one thing I have learned through fighting anti-Semitism, and that is it doesn't really matter what you, Joe, or anyone on this call thinks of the official policies of the state of Israel, right? Many of us will, amongst all of us, everyone will have a different opinion. But the ones who hate us and attack us, they anyways bundle us all together. So, internally, we also need to keep looking to what unites us rather than to what divides us. And
Right.
then probably on the most daily level, again, engage, engage, engage. Do not assume that even the ones that say something offensive to you necessarily know what they're talking about. Many will, some will, but actually most people are either ignorant or just watching the news, right? And we all know what the news talk about Israel or the Jewish community.